In this segment, we're going to look at the actual regulatory process, the process that the agencies follow to review your software before granting you approval to proceed to market. Now, we're going to focus on the big picture here, on the principles that they follow, as opposed to the details. The details are likely to change. As we begin, we're going to have a short video clip of Mr. Michael Nyla, which just explains a little bit the process, and it's a good overview. So we'll go to that video next.
The FDA won't review your code, but they will review your requirements and how you've defined your code. The other two big things for software evidence are going to be the human factors, the usability, and I mentioned that earlier, and the cybersecurity. Those three items, when most of the laws are written for a screw, like a dental implant, when you're looking at these things. So they're, a typical non-software will have mechanical testing, biocompatibility, electrical, all that stuff, all those sort of things. With software, there's only those three main things that they can look at to show that your device works. And so you really should make sure that you're looking at the guidances and doing a full job of your software verification, validation, your human factors, usability, verification, validation, and your cybersecurity as well. So those would be the three things I would focus on if you're getting ready to go to the FDA, regardless of the class level.
Okay, so let's just recap here before we jump into talking about the regulatory process. This is from the mission statement of the agency. They're worried about efficacy, whether your software works, and by works, it has the appropriate functionality to meet its intended uses. Safety, that it does not cause harm to the patient or to the caregiver. And for software, a lot of that comes down to usability, making sure the user interface is such that we don't get into errors, and security, that the software is designed to prevent malicious use. And again, for software, a lot of that we have to worry about is cybersecurity. And those are the things that Mr. Nilo mentioned. Your verification and validation often means a lot of efficacy, your usability, and your cybersecurity. Those are the things that come into play. So in our usual way, the device classification, we mentioned this before, talking about the IMDRF guidelines in the previous segment, comes down to risk. So the FDA classifies devices, and software is a device when it's regulated, into three classes, class 1 to 3. And these are low to moderate risk is class 1, class 2 is moderate to high risk, class 3 is high risk. And with these classifications come both the regulations here under, general controls, special controls, pre-market approval controls, we'll explain those in the next slide, and the actual review processes. Class 1 devices are usually exempt. You just have to file notification you're going to market, so it's registered, so they can find you. For class 2, we have two different processes, what's called the pre-market notification, the 510K process, or the Novo process. And for class 3, we have something called the pre-market approval process. So we're classifying the devices based on risk, and the requirements in the review process, just what I mentioned, depend on this classification. So as in every aspect of medical software, your risk level determines the process. It determines what you have to do. So let's look at the controls and the situation here. Most of the software, especially software as a medical device, comes under class 2 usually. So what are the controls we're under? We're under both general and special controls. So for general controls, we just have to follow good manufacturing practices. So no adulteration, keeping sure that documentation is up to date, that the paperwork is in place, that declarations are correct. These are just the basics that the agencies ask for. Special controls are specific to the device, special to the software. And this involves often meeting performance standards. So if you have a piece of software to detect cancer from images, your special controls may mean an accuracy of 80 or 90 or 95%, depending on the situation. Many of the special controls, in many cases, come from predicate devices. If there's a similar thing that was approved by the agency before, what they did may become your special controls. So to just give us a discussion on this topic, we have a clip from an interview from Dr. Nicholas Pedrick from the FDA, and he'll discuss this whole process.
So general controls are the basic authority we have in the medical device laws. So things about adulteration, misbranding, device registrations, those rules that apply to those that you need to do, pre-market notification, records and reports that you need to keep, the good manufacturing practices that are available. So those are sort of the general ideas of in the law, these are our regulations, you need to follow these regulations around these various aspects. And if you do that, then, if that was all that was needed, then we would say that this device could be marketed. So something like a class 1 device, which are these lower risk devices, those would fall under just general controls. Special controls are used when general controls aren't good enough, that we can't be satisfied safety and effectiveness with just general controls. So they're usually device specific and includes things like pre-market standards, post-market surveillance requirements, patient registries, special labeling, and then potentially pre-market data requirements. So that would mean there's some type of testing or data that's required pre-market in order to evaluate that device. We call them special controls because they're related typically to a device, a type of device, which is in class 2. So in class 2, you typically have general and special controls, which are these specific data and requirements associated with the device class.
Okay, in addition to these requirements, we have 3 different review processes for the different types of software. The most common one in software, and I'm sure many of you have heard the expression 510K. Here, the FDA determines that the device, the software, anytime you hear the word device, you can substitute the word software in your mind, is substantially equivalent, has a similar safety profile to a previously commercialized product. This is called the predicate. So in this particular case, if you have a piece of software that does something, for example, detects tumors from MRI images, and there's a previous piece of software, a different product somebody else has marketed that does more or less the same thing, you can claim that that is your predicate, and all you have to do is say, we're similar to something you have already approved. So this is a 510K process, and a lot of time in this business is spent looking for a predicate because that makes life simpler. In the cases where there's not a predicate, but we're still in class 1 or class 2, this is type 1 type classification, there's something called the Novo process. It's a newer process here. We'll talk a little bit about more detail in a video clip in a minute. And these are, your device here is reviewed on its own, but you have to provide evidence of safety and effectiveness for the intended use. And there's no predicate here, so you say, okay, we're setting the bar ourselves here. And you have to convince the agency that this is good enough on its own right. Pre-market approval, this is where we must demonstrate reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness. This is really complicated and expensive, and your company has to be set up with a full quality system as if your product was already on the market. We will not get into that for the purpose of this lecture. So to discuss the de novo process, we have a second clip from Mr. Nilo.
So de novo process is for a class 2 risk product that there isn't a predicate out there. So let's say we'll use the imaging we just, I used as an example. If there was never a software that was used to diagnose sarcoma out there and there was nothing to compare it against, then you would need to use the de novo process, which is kind of the in-between between the 510K and the PMA. Because since it's going to be on its own, the first one, you need to show on your own, you're not comparing it to anyone else, that this device works and works well in a safe and effective manner. But the controls in terms of that quality management system requirement that we talked about is still in the class 2 bucket. So you don't need to have it fully in place until after approval, because de novo will get you a class 2, or technically a class 1, but that doesn't happen very often, class 2 approval. And then once you have a de novo clearance, though, the next company behind you can come up and use your device as a 510K. So as a de novo, though, the other thing is you get to set the special controls that we talked about. Whatever evidence you put forward and think is really important to demonstrate their safety and effectiveness, you can set as your own special controls. So the next group coming behind you, or even your next product as an iteration, will need to meet those requirements.
So in a recent review paper by Benjamin et al., and you can see the paper in the top left-hand corner of the slide, they reviewed the state of AI-based FDA-approved medical device and algorithms. This was a couple of years ago, and at the time there were 29. This paper has a live table, so if you go online and you look them up, you'll see that there are more now software listed there. Of these 29, 23 used the 510K process, so they found a predicate, and they demonstrated the new software is substantially equivalent. 5 used the de novo process. This is new technology, but it was not high risk. And there was one case that used the full PMA, and this was for software to do a continuous glucose monitoring system. This is a high-risk device, and so it requires more work. If you go to the table and find the number of the approval, you can search for that on the FDA page, and you can actually see the paperwork that the FDA issues in approving. So some of these are short. For the PMA, this is a very long set of paperwork. because of the risk involved in the process. Now, so this is the process in the United States. In Europe, in the European Union, the process is a little different. So we're now looking at the Medical Device Regulation of 2017 that went into effect in May of 2021. It was delayed actually a little bit because of the pandemic. The MDR classifies devices into classes 1, 2A, 2B, and 3. Software always starts out as 2A, but as the document says, if it can cause death or irreversible deterioration of a person's state of health, then it becomes class 3. If it can result in a serious deterioration of a person's state of health or a surgical intervention, in which case it becomes class 2B. So that's typically, of course, just like the FDA, the moment you move up from 2A to 2B to 3, what is expected goes up. One thing that makes Europe different is that the review is done by notified bodies. So these are private companies that are authorized by government agencies, what's called competent authorities, to review a set of products, a group of products, like a dossier, a particular category of products. So you're not actually getting reviewed by the government, so you're getting reviewed by these private bodies, which of course themselves are now audited by the government agencies to make sure they're doing the right thing. And the result of the review process is a conformance certificate, the so-called CE mark. You may see it on a whole lot of other non-medical products around you. Just take a look. I'm sure you'll find one that gets placed on the device. So to talk us through the European process, we have a clip from an interview with Dr. Andrea Biasucci from the consulting company Confinis AG in Switzerland.
In Europe, the structure is quite different, meaning that we have the European Commission, that is a very high-level transnational organization. Then we have competent authorities that are in every state of the union and that are competent for their own market. So they monitor the market, and they ensure that the market is safe, and they take actions whenever there is a problem on the market. And then they have another entity that is, interestingly, a private entity that is a private company, basically, a set of private companies called notified bodies that receive the power jointly from competent authorities and the European Commission to analyze a dossier of devices and release CE marks for certain types of devices. Now, I know this sounds extremely complicated. That's exactly how it is. So basically, the idea is that for certain device types, namely class 1 devices, pure class 1 devices, the manufacturers can can generate a declaration of conformity on their own. For class 2A, class 2B, and class 3 devices, which are the other classes of the devices, plus some special class 1 devices that have some special functions like measuring sterile surgical instruments and reusable instruments, you need to ask a notified body to check the technical documentation for you and release a CE mark for you. That's how it works. So you don't interact with the authorities at this type. When you submit your dossier, you start to interact with the authorities at the post-market level or if there is a problem on the market.
To round up this discussion, let's take a look at the other major markets, and we'll talk about China. The regulator in China was called the National Medical Products Administration, the NMPA. This was formerly called the CFDA, the Chinese FDA, so you can see the sort of connections here. It still uses 3 risk classes, class 1, class 2, and class 3. China has its own unique process, but it shows a lot of similarities with the United States. It has its own good manufacturing practice and is similar to the quality system regulation on CFR 820. The first guidance of software was issued in 2015, and here are some of the differences. The testing here needs to be done to Chinese national or an industry standards, so there's some differences as you work in the Chinese system. So we have one final video clip in this segment, and this is from Ms. Sarah Li, who's a regulatory consultant at this company, China Med Device, and she'll talk to us a little bit about the situation in China.
In China, the National Medical Product Administration is the leading authority who evaluates a medical device conformity before being placed on the market. So China NMPA has a similar role as FDA in the review and approval of medical devices. The China GMP regulation is similar to FDA's requirements in CRF Part 820, and China NMPA may ask for a QMS audit to oversee medical device manufacturers. There are 3 risk classes, Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3. Something unique to China, the clinical pathway does not depend on classification. If devices are not on an NMPA clinical trial exemption catalog, they will either need a comprehensive comparison to an equivalent device or undergo a clinical trial to meet regulatory expectation. Regarding medical software, China listed it as a regulated product as early as 2003, but the first guidance about registering medical software was not released until 2015. They are emphasizing more on cybersecurity, mobile computing, and now they are working on providing more guidance in emerging areas like deep learning-based AI software and AI classification.
And as the clip concluded, this area of deep learning software and AI classification is sort of the emerging frontier of both medical software and the regulatory process. And we will take a more detailed look of all of those issues in week 11. But in the next segment, we'll provide a quick introduction to this topic. Thank you.